Hey, if you're thinking, I barely have time to write, let alone start a podcast, I got you. My Start Your Author podcast checklist helps busy writers like you start a podcast without sacrificing your writing time. No more guessing or Googling. Starting is actually the easiest part of podcasting, and with this step-by-step checklist, you can fit it in over the next 6 weeks or even next weekend. Stop letting uncertainty hold you back. Grab your free checklist at the link below and get on your way to serving your target readers today. If you're looking for ways to take a break from your normal podcasting pace and beat the heat this summer, but at the same time you want to keep building your platform and marketing your book, well, then this episode is for you. Hey, I'm Kim, and I'm so thrilled you're here to learn how to reach and serve your readers as a podcast host and guest. So if you tuned in last episode to my conversation with my friend Amy Debrick on savoring your summer as a podcast host, you may already have plans in the works. Now, don't worry, I'm going to talk about guesting too on this episode. But let's start with podcast hosting. Maybe you've decided to take a scheduled break from recording and releasing new episodes over the summer. I've done that in August the past 2 summers, and it's been such a nice breather. Now, like we mentioned on the last episode, if you're going to take a break, let your listeners know. One thing I have done is recorded a generic "She was on a break" episode. Yes, I'm still Team Ross on that one. If you know, you know. So record a quick break episode, and pro tip, don't mention your return date in the audio in case it changes. Lesson learned on that one. But do put your return date in your episode title. So it's like on a podcast break, back on 9/1, or however you want to date it. That way, when listeners come to your show, especially new ones, they're going to see right away that you're on a break. You didn't just ghost your listeners and just stop having episodes, and they're just clueless, like if you'll ever be back, right? So let them know. Plus, your episode title is so much easier to update if your return date changes. Then for yourself, when you set that return date, don't just mark it on the calendar and forget about it. Again, lesson learned here. Don't let that date sneak up on you and then you realize you haven't recorded any episodes to be ready to return to your podcast. Make a plan for when you'll plan out and record your new episodes, especially if you're launching a book this fall. We're going to talk about that more in a future episode. Now, keep in mind, just because you're taking a break from recording and releasing new episodes doesn't necessarily mean you're taking a break from growing your show, especially if that's how you're building your platform and marketing your book. That's where the beauty of guesting comes in, and we're going to talk about that in just a bit. Now, maybe you've decided to power through the summer, but as Amy and I talked about in the previous episode, you might want to change things up for the summer as a podcast host. So, you're trying to make things easy on you if you have a different schedule this summer, and you also want to make it easy on your listeners because they likely have changes in their schedule too. So here's some ideas for keeping your show going consistently, but giving you a break from your normal schedule this summer. As you think through these, always remember your author goals and record episodes to meet them, like we talked about in episodes 152 and 153. So, number 1, re-air old interviews. This seems to be the go-to for most hosts because, we're constantly getting new listeners to our show that may not have heard these past episodes, or maybe they're ones that really resonated with your listeners, so they would love to hear it again. But one thing I've learned since Amy and I recorded that conversation 2 years ago is that we typically pick our popular episodes, meaning the most downloaded, and we think these are the ones we need to re-air. But like we talked about in episode 156, Downloads don't always mean listeners consumed the whole episode. So you might want to look at that again to see which ones were the most consumed and have those be the ones you re-air, not necessarily the ones that were the most downloaded. Like maybe there was something in your title or maybe the guest attracted their attention, but once they downloaded it, maybe they didn't stick around. So you always want to re-air ones that people are actually going to stick around and listen to, and more importantly, take action on, because those will help you meet your author goals. Then number 2, record short solo episodes, especially if you typically only record interviews and if you're going to be guesting and leading listeners back to your own show. We talk about this a lot more on episode 66 on the 4 things you should do first to grow your show by guesting on others. And you could batch these solos up and schedule them even before summer begins, or just take little pieces of time throughout your summer and air those if that's a schedule you're used to doing. Then number 3, you could collaborate with others, especially if you typically only air solo episodes. Now's the time to collaborate with others. Now, the key here is you're not one to take time to record long, time-consuming interviews that defeats the whole mission of your show, right? And the mission of savoring summer. You want to be strategic. So maybe you plan to pitch yourself to podcasts this fall. What better way to start that conversation than inviting the host to be your guest first, if it's a fit for your show and your time schedule, like we talked about in episode 44. Or how about inviting them to be a guest host or do a takeover of your show and let them record a solo episode, especially if they are in the middle of a launch. They will be chomping at the bit to do that. Or even if they have more time and you want to do an interview, maybe let them record the interview for you. The list of choices is endless, y'all. So number 4, another idea is, this is similar to number 1, re-airing old episodes. But instead, if there's a solo episode that you aired that had multiple points, you could break up that topic into individual shorty episodes and re-air those. So maybe it's a solo episode, but also it could be like a speaking topic. Maybe you spoke somewhere and gave several points in that topic that could easily be broken down into multiple episodes that would stand alone on their own, but like within a series. So I did this with episode 3, one of my very first episodes, that was 9 ways to grow your platform by guesting on podcast. It was a very popular episode that I re-aired as episode 46. But then the next time I was considering re-airing it, instead I thought, you know what? It's summer. People have less time to listen. Their attention spans are much shorter. So how about instead of one episode with all 9 tips, I would break that up into 9 short episodes. And then I could also update it if I wanted to over the summer. And it was super popular with you all. You downloaded it and you listened all the way because, of course, it was short episodes. And then number 5, air your interviews on other shows. That's exactly what I did with Amy in the previous episode. And I've aired, I think, 3 interviews on my show, and I need to do it a lot more now that I've been interviewed, I think, 30 more times on topics that will serve you and the mission of this show. So I need to remember to do that for y'all. Now, remember, this is your show. You're the boss and you can do what you want. Kind of like Rachel in that tattoo shop. Again, if you know, you know. You're the boss. You can take a break. You can power through the summer, or you can get creative and think of new ways to release new content over the summer. But just remember your author goals you're trying to accomplish with your podcast and tell your listeners when appropriate if things are changing. Now, let's talk about podcast guesting over the summer. Does your summer schedule allow for time to record interviews on other people's shows? If so, get to pitching so you can get those yeses and get booked on their calendars and get those interviews recorded. If you're a podcast host, building your author platform and marketing your book on your podcast, well, then guesting on other people's shows is the best way to get new listeners to your own show. And I'll put a link in the show notes to my podcast guesting playlist. But for now, remember your author goals. And here's 2 quick and easy ways you can start pitching yourself. One is in Facebook groups that you're active in, and especially podcasting ones are open to this more so. But, look at the rules of the group. And if they allow you to pitch yourself or to post in there, I think usually it's like a hashtag, be a guest, then create just a short post offering up the value you can bring to listeners. You might be surprised by how many respond and want to get you on their calendar. And then two, you can use the Podmatch service to connect you with hosts. You can hear my overview of the Podmatch service on episode 131. And that's a great way that won't take up a lot of your time because Podmatch does that for you in the background, matching you up with potential hosts, and you could get some interviews booked this summer. Now, if your summer schedule doesn't allow for being interviewed, like maybe you have all your kids at home and there's just no space in your calendar to jump on an interview, well, you can still be working on your podcast guesting strategy. So on episode 47, we talked about getting your home base ready first if you're guesting to grow your platform or market your book. And then on episode 66, we talk about 4 things you should do if you're guesting to grow your show. So these are things you can work on over the summer when you have time. And if you have those things in place already, then start working on drafting your pitch emails. Start working on finding shows and building relationships with the podcast host, because you can do that in small increments over the summer if you're limited on time. And you've heard me say it time and time again that if you have a relationship first, you may not have to pitch at all. You'll just get invited. That's what's happened to me for all my interviews on other people's podcasts. Relationships, relationships, relationships. And again, we go into all that in the podcast guesting playlist that I'm going to link in the show notes. Now, similar with hosting, don't take a break from interviews and then let that return date sneak up on you, especially if you have a book launching this fall. If you're taking a break over the summer from being interviewed, then be sure to note on your calendar when your return date is and really look at that calendar in relation to your launch date and figure that out, because you might be surprised that you need to back up a little earlier than you thought in order to get on as a guest this fall, if that's what you want to do when your book releases. So we can talk about that more in a future episode as well. So hopefully one of these ideas will excite you, as you do deserve to savor your summer. You do deserve to make things easy on you and easy on your listeners. But you also deserve to be meeting your author goals as a podcast host and guest, right? So thanks for tuning in today to Book Marketing Mania. And as always, I'll be there for you next episode to help you reach and serve your readers one podcast at a time. See you then.